Welcome to Garden Views, interesting conversations with interesting people who have done and or are doing interesting things. So sit back and enjoy.
Welcome everyone into Garden Views, and this week we are welcoming in Daniele-Hadi Irandoost. He's coming to us from the UK, from Scotland. You're in Scotland now, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. And we're talking about Spycraft. Those of you who have been longtime listeners, you might recognize his name way back when he was on the show once before, which was a show, but actually it was he and someone else actually interviewing me secretly to make sure I wasn't a spy myself. But that's a different story for a different day. Daniele, thank you very much for being back in the garden.
Jeff, it's a great pleasure, and thank you for having me back.
Absolutely. So, obviously we're going to be talking about Spycraft, so I think people want to know a little bit about you, your background, what your experience is, what your research is, and how you know about Spycraft.
Well, so I'm currently reading for a PhD in sociology of surveillance at the University of Glasgow, and I've written 2 books on Spycraft, so I've been sort of researching this whole field for the past 10 years or so. When I went to do my undergraduate degree at the University of Aberystwyth in Wales, I did a course called International Politics and Intelligence Studies, and then I did a master's in Intelligence Studies and Strategic Studies. So I've been sort of studying this field for the past 10 years. I've written 2 books on that. My recent book was published last month. It's called The House of Spies. I've also written another book on espionage called A New Vision of Spycraft. So I won't say whether I'm in intelligence if I am a spy, but I think sort of some people think I am, but some people don't. So.
Okay, well, we'll keep it mysterious. So for anybody who is interested, we have had a former spy on the show. Now he's retired. He's also writing fiction books and doing the speaker thing. His name is Gavin Stone. So, that's a show that's on Garden Views. So I think it's within the last year. We've also had a private military contractor on, at least one, maybe 2. And last week, probably someone who does the same thing called a consultant, but he was talking more about his days in special forces. So maybe these would all be good companion shows. I'm not exactly sure, but fun stuff to check out. And obviously the goal is you always want to get new listeners, and you want to get new listeners who came in probably because they're interested about this topic to listen to other shows, so they sort of get addicted to it, or at least used to me. And then if they're used to me and they trust the content, then they stick around, hopefully as long as I do, which, is directly related to how many people stick around and join the garden tour. So, okay. So obviously this is a field of study for at least 10 years. So you deep study, not just a little bit, PhD, 3 books, maybe not in the field itself. We're not going to push on that. We're not going to push any buttons. We don't want any lionesses or John Wicks, being activated and coming after you after we revealed your country of location. Although you could be fooling us. It could be a VPN and all that. For all we know, you could be in the Seychelles or Cuba or Angola. Who knows? So take us to the beginning. Take us to the start. Maybe tell us about young Daniele. What did he do, and then tell us what you want to tell us about the trade.
Well, I was born in Romania. I'm half Iranian, half Romanian. I moved to the UK in 2010. As a migrant, and I've lived here since then. So I've got, I was naturalized as a UK citizen. So I'm a citizen of 3 countries, which is a good thing, I suppose, in this sort of in a world where the corporations are trying to stop people from being able to travel. I think that's what's happening. Freedom of movement, I think, is slowly becoming restricted. But we can talk about that later. I, as a teenager, as a child, I was always drawn to sort of the spy fiction. James Bond and Jason Bourne and Sam Fisher is actually my favorite. He's a character in a video game called Splinter Cell, and that's associated with Tom Clancy. So
I know it's the only video game I've ever won.
So as a child, I was always drawn into to those sorts of characters. So this is where my passion came from. As I learned more about the world of intelligence and spycraft, I became disillusioned with it because of its ethical aspects. I don't find it ethical. I think the people who work in it, there are good people in that world, but I find the whole profession of spycraft sort of questionable, and so, what I'm doing now at the University of Glasgow is looking into how intelligence agencies can be overseen by activists and people. We've got select committees in, the legislature, so we've got courts, so in the judiciary, who can oversee, intelligence work, but sometimes they're not effective, So, about 10 or so years ago, we had Edward Snowden. He, the whistleblower that exposed the surveillance programs in America and here in the UK, the Five Eyes. That was a whistleblower. It wasn't an official oversight mechanism. So I think what I'm trying to do at the minute with my studies is look into how people, journalists, lawyers, activists and civil society basically can hold the intelligence agencies to account, and I think that needs to become a bit more robust, especially with what's happening now. With surveillance, intrusive surveillance, mass surveillance, bulk surveillance, CCTV, smart CCTVs, AI that use AI to recognize people's faces. And even the way they walk, it's called. I'm not sure the terminology. I think it's called gait. How you walk, how you run, and that can be analysed, and you could be identified by the way you walk. And I think that's very intrusive and dangerous for democracy and human rights, and so on.
I know that there's software that tracks different angles of your face. I think the word is physiognomy. I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly. My wife, God bless her, she says it all the time, but she's from Ecuador, so with her accent, I would say it with like a South American accent and still botch it. But they get you from every angle, and then they have a 3D version of your face. And with AI and deep fakes, it is really an era scary. I mean, when you said the ethical issues of spycraft, I mean, in essence, spycraft is purposeful deception, trying to get someone else's secrets that another agency, usually a country, doesn't want you to have. Sometimes it's inter-country, sometimes it's non-state actors. I mean, we understand there's a bunch of permutations, but in broad strokes. And countries have different interests, and some countries are worse actors than others. I'm not sure if there's any country that's completely pure. I'm sure people can debate about that forever, but I don't know. I mean, I guess what people tell themselves, it's the greater good for their God and their country.
Yeah, I mean, so intelligence agencies throughout the world. It's not just Western intelligence agencies. It's throughout the world. Their practices differ. It depends on how they function as a state. But intelligence agencies are involved in torturing, extrajudicial interrogations, and Guantanamo Bay is probably the most famous place where that sort of thing happens. It's not just there. I mean, in Africa, where I'm also sort of focusing at the minute, you've got people politicians, heads of governments that have used the intelligence agencies to assassinate opposition, the opposition, their adversaries in other parts of the government. So that sort of thing happens. And, in Western democracies, it's more subtle. It's more sort of done behind closed doors, which is smarter. It keeps it it's more subtle. It's more intelligent because people aren't sure that it's happening, and
it's also they exploit legal loopholes. So the things are done in international air or international water. So it's not breaking any law. Or a site that maybe does or doesn't exist in a country where it's not illegal to do what is being done, regardless of it. So you're not breaking any law of, say, Poland or Jordan or Egypt or whatnot when you're doing it, but it's U.S. agents or people from those countries, their agents at the bequest of the U.S. or Britain or Germany or whoever, Australia. Let's just blame everything on Australia. Actually, in this show, whenever there's a straw country they want to say that is doing everything wrong and for all the wrong reasons, it's Jeffzikistan, my country, Jeffzikistan. So all those other countries, I apologize to. It's Jeffzikistan doing all these things. I know this might be a trite question, but in this day and age of media, you probably have access to almost all the same media I do. So which popular show on this is the most accurate? Would it be like a Homeland and MI6, I believe was the show? Is it Condor, The Diplomat, which is popular on Netflix? There's a show called The Recruit on Netflix, which is actually was strangely good, which was about the legal department in the CIA, and which was actually, sort of a semi-comedy, but semi-not. I mean, one, are you familiar with any of the shows I just named? But what is the most accurate one, if at all? Or do they all have elements of accuracy? Or are they all wildly, what am I saying? Grandiose?
I think that's a great question because, spy fiction is sort of a huge part of entertainment, pop culture, Mm. And, my favorite is The Prisoner. It's a 60s TV series. I've watched some seasons of Homeland. I've liked it, but I found it more. I found it superficial. But The Prisoner, it's a British spy show. I think there are only 16 episodes, and it's about. You don't know the name of the spy.
Right.
It's implied he works for a secret agency. He resigns at the beginning of the show, and when he returns to his home, he's sort of gassed basically, and he finds himself in a little sort of village. It's called a village when he wakes up. And he's trying to escape from that village. It's sort of a village where he's being watched all the time. He's being surveilled, and sort of you're not sure who's behind the village. He's always, the people in the village are known by their sort of code names, sort of, number 1, number 2, number 3, and he's number 6, and he's always meeting number 2 as the sort of the person who's in control of the village, but he's always trying to get to number 1. I don't want to say too much, but he never does, because number 1 is actually himself. So he's the prison is inside of him.
There's an Iron Maiden song called "The Prisoner," and they use part of the phrasing in the beginning of the song. He goes, "Who is number one? Who is number two? I am not a number, I am a free man." And then you hear the other voice just laughing at him.
Yeah, that's number two. Yeah, that's the one.
And then, of course, Austin Powers, they made fun of it, where they go, "Who does number two work for?"
Yeah, and I mean, I think that it's a psychological piece. So, yeah, I mean, you know the idea. So, so it's the prisoner and probably Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy as well.
That was good.
Show.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, most TV shows and films about espionage, they're made. They're sort of. They're made into sort of entertainment pieces. So they're
Sure.
entertaining. I think nowadays most spy work is behind desktops. It's behind screens because signals intelligence, which is sort of opposite of human intelligence, that's spies on the field. I think most money nowadays is poured into signals intelligence. Hackers and that sort of thing. So, yeah, I mean, nowadays, if you're thinking of a spy, it's probably behind a screen. And, I mean, in Skyfall, one of the James Bond films, there was a scene in the museum. I don't know if you've seen it, but between Daniel Craig and Q, where they're sort of trying to compete with each other. So, you've got the Q as the brain and James Bond as the sort of the muscle. And they're trying to say, they're trying to sort of compete who's more important nowadays. And
right.
the reality is it's Q.
I vaguely remember that, but yeah, I mean, they even replaced 007. There were other 00s, so yeah, and there's only one Q, I suppose. It's funny. It's not funny actually, but we think that I think we know that spy movies are sensationalized. There's nobody like Jason Bourne out there. There's no one guy who can, take out 12, Delta Force guys by themselves. It's just not, it's just not a thing. There's no Black Widow projects out there, anything like that. But we are in an era where there's a whole lot of Russian oligarchs falling out of hotel windows, dying in the showers, or dying in swimming pools on vacation properties, in the same time. And, there's a whole lot of rich people going to an island of a guy who, supposedly committed, suicide in a federal prison. So there's, not that that's necessarily spycraft per se, but I mean, it's tactically, it's, the same thing. And maybe it was spycraft. I don't know. So there's obviously, there are still the assassins. I mean, some are less elegant than others. I mean, in Mexico, politicians, judges, and police are killed. In Ecuador recently, political candidates, famously, you saw a political candidate for president, someone just walked up to them, shot them 5 times in the head, got into a car, and they drove off. I mean, so there's obviously political assassinations. That's not all spycraft, but maybe it is. I mean, I don't know. I think you're right about the surveillance, and I'm sorry to be rambling on, but there's been this kabuki dance in the U.S. for probably close to the last 20 years of, basically bringing in social media and big tech companies before Congress and having these big hearings about all the things they're doing wrong. And the end result is they'll share all their data with Congress. Well, that's not protecting the public's privacy. That's just taking the privacy that the big tech and everyone's taking and giving it to the government also that already has your tax returns and, and everything else that's traced to your social security number. So, that's why I call it a kabuki dance. You have all this big show of, Congress people drilling people. But at the end, it's like, you'll just share everything with us. Okay, cool. That'll take care of it. Oh, and send out a privacy disclosure once a year so you make sure to kill some trees. I mean, I don't know. Is any of that tied into what you want to talk about, or is that just one of my famous rants without a purpose?
No, I mean, I think it was spot on. And what's happening now with capitalism is we've got a new phase of capitalism, and it's called surveillance capitalism. There's an academic called Shoshana Zuboff who's written a book on that called Surveillance Capitalism, and it's a brilliant book. I mean, it's one of the most eye-opening books that I've read. And sort of the idea behind it is that by watching people all the time and trying to predict their behavior, you're pushing them to, becoming basically sort of consumers or sort of, chemicals, basically, that don't think, that aren't independent. So that's a big part of Western sort of capitalism at the moment. But yeah, I mean, in terms of assassinations, that's happening. I mean, Mossad is one of the clearest examples of intelligence agencies in the world that have gone around the world and sort of assassinated, targets. I talk about it in my book. I analyze whether what's Mossad done has it helped the Israeli national security, basically, and it's quite questionable. Assassinating people all the time, sort of, does it help your safety? You can't sort of respond to violence with violence. So I question all that in my book. But if we sort of go to Africa, assassinations happen there all the time. And they're found. It's not sort of hidden. It happens in the open. And and I mean, the CIA has been involved with assassinations in all over the world. Again, if we look at Castro, for example, there was Operation Mongoose, I think, and the CIA attempted 607 or something, 607 ways to assassinate, different ways of assassinating Castro. There was a documentary by Channel 4 that looked into that. So yeah, I mean, it's what the intelligence agencies have been sort of involved in. It's called covert action in their terminology, I mean, and it's not. There was a when I can't remember I can't remember in the 70s when Nixon was exposed by the investigative journalists. I can't remember the name of the committee.
Woodward and Bernstein were the journalists.
Yeah. So
I think it's the Watergate Committee.
Yeah, the Watergate Committee. That's it. They questioned whether covert action works, and there was an internal CIA document that said no, it doesn't. It's actually, it might work in the short term as a silver bullet, if you like, but long term, it's got hugely, it's got negative consequences for the country. I mean, let's take the revolution in Iran, for example. I mean, before that, there was a coup by the Shah, and that was helped by the CIA and MI6. But long term, if you look at that, there was a revolution, and there was a negative consequence for the CIA. For the American nation. There was instead of an ally, you have an enemy. So.
To this day. And it's interesting you're talking about, signals intelligence, electronic intelligence is sort of the wave. And, I remember during the Iraq War, one of the things that got blamed for some of the failures of the lead up and the aftermath and, probably to this day was the lack of human intelligence. So, I think if everyone's relying on electronic intelligence, I know that electronic has gone so far beyond and it's advancing quickly, but to abandon human intelligence is probably a bad idea if we just learned a lesson of 20 years ago. I mean, it's not ancient history. And, to go back to the Israelis, I mean, they just, did some stunning things, whether they're good or not, or helpful or not, I don't know, but to actually have created a actual real company hungry to make pagers, and somehow, Hezbollah or Hamas or whomever who bought pagers there because they knew that they couldn't use cell phones or even burners. So the Israelis had the foresight to do all this and figured they'd go to pagers and then somehow planted, exploding devices in them. Whatever you think of the tactics, it's spectacularly terrifying. If you're a group a group that can't communicate isn't really much of a group. Then it's just got to get together, and that's an easy target. So, the Israelis famously have a lot of human intelligence, and I imagine that comes from, long-term aspects, or the Manchurian Candidate, the Yuri, the Kevin Costner movie, No Way Out. The Americans was a show with that, but also throwing money around, bribery.
Yeah. I mean, bribery was a big thing. And you mentioned, in terms of human intelligence. Yeah, I mean, the diversity in human intelligence is very important. So, I mean, there's a big thing at the minute in the UK about diversifying the intelligence force, because traditionally people within MI6, MI5, and GCHQ, they came from upper middle class background. Mostly they've been to Eton College or Oxford and Cambridge. So traditionally they were sort of made up of these sorts of people, and that has negative consequences. If you have people from one sort of background, they won't be able to understand what's happening in other parts of the world. In the Middle East, for example, Al Qaeda, if you haven't got people who understand their mentality, then it makes counterterrorism difficult. So, in the 80s, there was a guy called Peter Wright who wrote a book called Spycatcher, and that was co-authored with Peter Greenglass, I think, and he actually directed one of the Jason Bourne films, 2 or 3 films actually. So it was sort of an exciting book, and he talked about how spies in the UK, they're made up of Freemasons or sort of the gentlemen in private clubs. So it's a huge thing, sort of, in terms of intelligence culture in the UK. I think it's slightly different in America because of its sort of history, but in the UK, because of its class-ridden sort of class divide, there's more trust. The upper classes are trusted more than if you're from a working class background. And, let's face it, the intelligence agencies are used to spy on the working class people, the sort of the masses, so.
Was that sort of the history, of Europe, and especially Britain? You basically had 3 classes: the workers, the priests, and the nobility. And the nobility's job was to fight and, collect money and eat and stuff. But, that's how they earned it, is they were fighting. And you had the working people, I guess occasionally you had to raise the militia, the Ferd or whatever it was called in whatever era. And then, I guess the priests, they got to make some rules too. But, and I guess that survives. Our own CIA, I'm American, obviously, sort of the mythos from the Skull and Bones, which was a Yale, so it's got that sort of patrician roots. But yeah, a lot comes from the military now and special forces, and they've done a pretty good job of recruiting from different aspects of, society, on purpose. But, I'm sure every agency has, probably for the reason that you stated. Before we move on to actually your books, which authors do you think got it the best? I'm sure Le Carre, he's probably the gold standard. Frederick Forsyth, I think The Day of the Jackal was brilliant. Icon was pretty brilliant. You had, some of the old Clancy stuff. Cardinal of the Kremlin was, I remember being very good. Talbot with the Percival. Tapestry, I think it was called. I don't know, but there's there's a whole bunch. There's the Daniel Silva books. Any number of them. Were any of them did you find them to be helpful to you, most realistic, or are they all Hollywooded up?
No, I think John le Carré is probably the best one. I've read 2 of his books. I can't remember what they were called, but yeah, I mean, he's the one who shows why the intelligence agencies can't be trusted. And, I mean, there's Graham Greene as well, I think. He's also a good spy fiction writer. They're the ones who were involved with the intelligence agencies, so they've got some idea of how it works. And yeah, I mean, John le Carré is probably my favorite. And I mean, I've read Fleming, the James Bond author. What's interesting about him is that the James Bond character. I don't think it comes across in the films, but in the books, he's an upper middle class guy. Who's rich. He can sort of go around and gamble, and he's got lots of fast cars. But I mean, a normal spy nowadays, I don't think he can afford anything like that. So
right, or they wouldn't have the childhood, so they can water ski, scuba dive, mountain climb, parachute, ski down the K-12. There was nothing he couldn't do. Expert shot. I mean, you have to be a landed gentry of leisure. Being trained from 4 years old to have all of those skills.
With a Rolex.
Yeah, of course, and also knowing what your favorite drink was, and being an expert at all gambling games and having no tells. I mean, that's not that. I mean, it might be possible for somebody to get that good at 1 or 2 things, but obviously James Bond was a superhero sort of. I want to say before superheroes. That's not true. There were always superheroes, but a different kind of superhero.
I mean, I will say something else. There was a scandal about 10 years ago in the UK called Spy Cops. They were policemen, basically, covert police operatives that infiltrated dissident groups, radical groups in the country, sort of, activists, environmental groups, sort of animal rights groups, in order to try and see what their plans were, what their radical plans were. And some of them, it was revealed that they were actually sleeping with activists and having children with them, but they were sort of spies, which was really unethical. So if you're trying to sort of say, are there James Bonds? I mean, in some ways you can say there are. I mean, and Spy Cops are probably the most obvious example in the UK, because they were trying to sort of, do
infiltrate.
what James Bond was doing.
Infiltrate by seduction.
Yeah.
I can't be a spy. We have 2 kids together. Yeah, that is something. All right, well, let's get into your books. I don't know if you want to start with the oldest to the newest, or you want to, start with the newest. But give us just the names, where they can be bought, and sort of what they're about.
So I've got 2 books on Spycraft. The first one is called A New Vision of Spycraft, or Necessary Notations on Espionage. I wrote that. It's a collection of essays that I wrote when I was at Aberystwyth University, and it goes into the ethics of spying, the sort of the operation of spying, how it actually functions in practice. So I go into what's called the intelligence cycle, how it functions, how its procedures work. I also go into the oversight of intelligence. So there's a committee in the UK called the Intelligence and Security Committee, which oversees the work of the intelligence agencies. And I criticise the way that works. I also return to that theme in my other book called Rahab's House of Spies, Covert Action, Military Intelligence and Espionage Oversight. which is more about the history of intelligence and sort of how signals intelligence was used during the First World War to basically turn the tide and sort of allow the Allied forces to win. So, Bletchley Park is a very famous example of signals intelligence that was used in the Second World War. The Enigma machine, the ultra secret, and we all, Alan Turing as a famous mathematician and code breaker. There was a film made about him called Imitation Game, I think, and Cumberbatch was the protagonist. That's a famous case of signals intelligence. But there was also signals intelligence before that in the First World War, and I look into that and how that basically changed the course of the war. I also look into other cases of intelligence in history. So I look into the CIA's role in foreign policy, so how they use covert action to sort of influence what was happening around the world. I look into the Mossad's work and how and whether or not it has helped Israel's security since its inception. I also look into oversight of intelligence. I'm arguing that official oversight mechanisms in the legislature are sort of they function as propaganda machines. I use Noam Chomsky. I mean, I'm very influenced by Noam Chomsky. I think he's one of those academics that can't be ignored. He's a brilliant analyst and intellectual. So I draw on his work to criticize the intelligence agencies. I mean, he's talked a lot about what the American spy machinery. So two books on intelligence. I'm currently working on my doctorate as well. So.
Wow! And then what do you do with that? Do you just keep writing books, or what does that doctorate lead to? I know I'm not your mother.
Well, I mean, teaching at a university will be an option, but nowadays work in academia is becoming sort of unattractive. So I'm looking into research. So writing books.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, as I'm sure there's the giantly broad term of consultant, which is out there. I mean, maybe more so in the United States than anywhere else, but whatever starts here grows outwards anyway. You catch all of our colds. That's sort of the way things seem to go these days. Though maybe not. Maybe COVID was the first indication that we'll catch all of China's colds. Maybe that's the indication of power shifts. I don't know, paradigm shifts. All right. So on the subject of like Spycraft, I mean, is there still like the old-fashioned dead drops, burner phones, doubling back, switching trains, all of that stuff that you see in movies or your more intelligent TV shows allegedly? Is that really a thing? I mean, I know that you said that most of it's behind the computer desk these days, but there has to be somebody out there, or even if it's just embassy to embassy conversation that you want off the record. I mean, there's just there's got to be something, or have I fallen for what I'm watching on TV?
No, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, spy cops are probably doing what spies on TV are sort of purported to do. I mean, I think it happens, but I think it depends on where it's happening. So I think Western democracies at the moment are slightly careful about what they're doing, and that's because of recent scandals like spy cops or Edward Snowden. I think they're sort of worried about their public relations aspect of their work, and I think they're trying to manage how they're viewed. And I mean, when 9/11 happened, when other terrorist attacks, in the West happened, there was some sort of excuse that they needed, that their budget had to be expanded all the time. But as we sort of as the world balance of power is changing and how international relations work. So, you mentioned China, and that sort of that paradigm is, our paradigm of how politics works, how national security works is changing. So there's more focus on cyber attacks, perhaps environmental, disasters. So terrorism is sort of becoming less acute, I think. But yeah, in terms of human intelligence, sort of license to kill, I think it depends on the country. I think probably in other parts of the world it's still happening. Maybe not the way, the way James Bond would do it, but I think it's still happening, and it's probably dirtier as well. Sort of tortures and assassinations. Yeah.
You said that the world power dynamic is shifting. Is the world power dynamic shifting, or is just the methods of doing the dirty work shifting? Or both?
I think it's shifting. It's sort of living in the UK. You sort of you see what's happening. I don't live in America, so it might be, we have different perspectives in terms of the role of America in the world, the American hegemony. For me, living in the UK, it seems like American hegemony is being sort of coming down, basically. I think China, Russia, the BRICS powers, I think they're sort of on the rise. And, in probably 10 years' time, the media, the mainstream media have to admit that, America is not the hegemony. Or Europe, basically, is sort of what's happening, I think, or what we're on our way to is this sort of multipolar world, sort of perhaps like George Orwell's vision in 1948, where sort of you've got different blocks around the world that are fighting each other, and that's how they keep people under control.
What do you mean? We've always been at war with East Asia.
Yeah. Sort of. Yeah. That's part of the propaganda that's happening. So.
Yeah. I am American, obviously. I have not studied the same things you are, but I am old enough to remember that in the 80s we were terrified of Japan. Economically, of course, we're terrified about the USSR, militarily, nukes. but with good reason. You don't have to be a powerful country in any other way. If you've got nukes, you're all of a sudden one of the strongest kids on the block. Then we were scared of some. Then we were scared of nothing, and that led to the Soviet Union falling, but basically turning back into a different version of the Soviet Union, and maybe to 9/11, and then perhaps an underreaction on one country and an overreaction on another country, and probably an overreaction on our own country in some ways, and a lot of things come from that. But I'm not sure that we're not overreacting to China. They have their own problems, and a parallel is Russia. So, before Russia invaded Ukraine, I knew that there were problems with the Russian military and whatever, because I listened to some smart people like Mike Hilliard of the Red Line podcast and Christoph Sanderson of the Eastern Border, because he's there. And they would tell you what the issues are. But here, you heard it a little bit, but not much. And everyone was afraid, don't want to mess with the Russians. They're going to kill you. And, I'm sure they can overwhelm Ukraine at some point. But they're doing it in a World War I type of way, and half their stuff doesn't work, and that might be kind. I recently, on one of my recent episodes of Garden of Doom, which very well could have been a Garden of Views, called The House Filler, interviewed a Taiwanese Canadian author who's from China, and she was basically revealed at the end of the book she wrote, which is up for some awards, was based on her grandmother's life, so it was ancestrally biographical. And she's like, there's a lot of corruption in China, and and basically described it the same as Putin. Everyone's telling him everything is great, everything works. So like Saddam, we believe Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction because he believed that he had, because they were lying to him. And a lot of stuff in China is the same. Yeah, maybe they have hypersonic missiles and some upper end carriers, and the upper end tech works, but yeah, a lot of their stuff has been misappropriated, and they've got a bunch of missiles and whatever saying there, but there's no fuel in them. There's water in them because they don't have fuel, and basically the same kind of corruption. And they also have a growing middle class, and growing middle classes tend to want things that a government like China's doing. This is a very long way of saying China might have its own problems, and it might be not a paper tiger, but not maybe an adolescent tiger, maybe not the full-fledged Siberian tiger that we're all worried about.
I mean, you're right, and I think when you said about fearing Russia and China, I mean that's part of what Noam Chomsky has talked about for years in terms of the propaganda model. That's how you manufacture consent, by sort of instilling fear in people's hearts and minds. You've got to fear China or Russia or Iran. So yeah, I mean, I think that George Orwell's vision of 1948 has probably sort of been implemented in America, and the media has been part of a huge part of that. And I mean, China does have huge problems. I mean, they're a diverse country, and they're trying to sort of make sure that the different ethnic minorities in China aren't sort of want to rebel against the elite in China.
The Han Chinese. It's basically a tribal caste system. I mean, I only know that because Jonah Goldberg from the Dispatch told me, not personally. I mean, I don't know him, but I'll tell you a secret. Also, this isn't a secret. When the EU first started, everyone here was panicking about the EU. I wasn't. I'm like, the entire history of Europe is Europe fighting Europe. And then of course it just took a few years before Greece almost went broke, then Portugal and Spain and Germany had to bail them all out, and they were upset about it, and they were busy still sort of celebrating, complaining about having to absorb Eastern Germany into Western Germany, into one unified Germany. And then, Brexit, and then, and Scotland every now and then wants to leave, the UK, and, so you've got, an economic zone. But, I think the one thing about Russia invading Ukraine is that it sort of put some of that on the sidelines, is that everyone's afraid, maybe we should at least stay friendly enough that we point our guns that way. But there's still, Europe historically is not a unified zone by any means, and the fact of the United States being a unified zone has always sort of been a myth. I mean, it's not that new a country, and we've had one civil war, started a revolution, which was really could have been called a civil war in some regards. We've had genocide, intentional and accidental on the indigenous, slavery, Jim Crow, and then there's continued, whether you want to call it blue state, red state, theocracy oriented, conspiracy oriented, uber woke oriented, whatever it is. We've got plenty of tribes here, and I don't think they've ever been more clearly on display than, well, right now, which, since these shows are evergreen, I'll date it. It's November 10th, 2024. Should be easy for me to remember because tomorrow's my birthday. Happy birthday, me. Thanks. And, we obviously just had an election and re-elected our second president, who was president once before, then wasn't, and came back, and, pretty controversial guy and a pretty controversial election. And who knows where things are, what's, the cabinet and everything's being developed now. I would think this would be a great time if you were friend or foe of the United States, but wanted to keep an eye on things. It's probably never been easy to find people to spy on or sidle up to.
Well, I mean, I don't know what's happened to America that that started this whole thing. I mean, I'm fascinated by American history. George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, and I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's such a, I don't know what's happened to this, the America that I've read about in history books.
Well, I mean, I think you probably read about it in very specific contexts of, Europe was at war, the Germans were bad, and then the Americans sent 1 million people over, with guns, and now we're free, yay! And now Germany's our friend, and and the biggest financial power in the And listen, I don't want to put down my country. I mean, I don't think I'd want to live in any other country, though I haven't lived anywhere else. But I mean, I know people from a lot of other countries. I don't know a single person that likes the government in their country, much like very few people like the government in this country. I mean, I think that's sort of the human condition to not like, not having control over yourself. But I think also part of us wants to be completely controlled by somebody else. So I think that we all have Jekyll and Hyde in us a little bit, or duality. But while we had the power, money, arms, whatnot, I'm just not sure that we were ever the romantic, Robert Redford of the world. I think that was a great image to have out there. But I mean, we've always been sort of, jumble a mess. But when the chips were down, we could, get our shit together, so to speak, and maybe, bail everyone out. But it was never not at a price. I mean, we've got bases all over the world. We have interests all over the world. And that's a good thing and not a good thing. But I mean, the United States Navy is basically the police force of the 7 seas. I mean, and that's good, but it's also bad. The U.S. dollar is the fiat currency of the world, which is good, but it's also bad depending on who you are. So I don't know what this has to do with Spycraft anymore. As usual, I'm lost in my own thoughts.
Well, no, I mean, the corporations have had a huge role in globalizing the American influence, and I think they've had a huge negative impact on how the world functions. There's a conspiracy about globalists, but I mean, there is, if we look at what the corporations have been doing, the corporations in Silicon Valley, they've been involved with, they've pushed that sort of surveillance capitalist sort of agenda throughout the world, and I think that's had a hugely negative impact on the way things work nowadays. This whole globalization agenda. I'm not sure it's doing the world any good. Having McDonald's everywhere. It's sort of. I don't know. I don't think it's had a good impact on the world. But I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm not saying it's bad, cosmopolitanism. I mean, I'm an international person myself. Sort of having lived in different countries. So. I think there's got to be some sort of balance. And, I mean, if we go back to history with people like Alexander the Great, I mean, he was trying to sort of stop people, different tribes from fighting each other. He was trying to sort of bring in a sort of a order to the world. He was trying to modernize it. And Napoleon Bonaparte was also trying to do the same sort of thing. He started the whole modern state enterprise. So, I think there's got to be some sort of balance.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely elements of globalization, and I think that you're right. It's probably more privatized, because from a government standpoint, I mean, aside from the days when every city was its own place, I mean, people say, well, we're going to globalization. I'm like, well, there's like 193 countries recognized, and depending on what other places you recognize, there's probably more like 200 or so. And that's like double what it was 100 years ago. And then I also hear people say they're trying to get rid of you. They're trying to get rid of people. Well, we just crossed like 8.1 billion, and we're rapidly heading up to 8.2 billion. I'm old enough to remember when we hit 4 billion. So if they're trying to get rid of us, whoever they are, they're doing a bad job of it. Now, that's not to say, but there's a different kind of globalization that you're talking about, which is corporate privatized, which lots of private stuff are public-private. I mean, the British East India Company is, the Hudson Bay Company, and I'm sure there's tons of others out there. And of course, in the Garden Views where we talk about space law, everyone knows that that's one of my concerns when it comes to space. It's probably a little bit overblown and probably at least 150 years too early. But, it's never too early to plan to avoid a giant problem. Anyway, I feel like I've sort of hijack the show a little bit, and I want you to get it back on track to Spycraft, or at least tell people, where and how they can buy your books and follow and support you.
Before I mention that, I kept saying 1948. It's actually 1984.
Oh, I see. That's funny because I know Orwell wrote his books in at least 84, like in 1926 or something like that. But I wasn't sure if the book took place in 1948. But then, of course, it's 1984. But 1984 isn't his only book. I mean, it's his seminal book, but there's also Animal Farm and others as well. So yeah, that's all right. Partial dyslexia. It's, well, you know what? Somebody hit you with one of those Havana syndrome beams and scrambled your brain because they knew you were on this very influential show today.
I need my tinfoil hat.
They work. Not the recycled kind, though. It's a shame.
Well, I mean, I think he intended it to be 1948 originally, because he was thinking of the United Kingdom. Mm-hmm. But so I mean that was in his mind. He wasn't actually thinking of the Soviet Union. He was actually thinking of the United Kingdom. But anyway, so people can order my books on Amazon, Amazon US. It's available in my second book is actually second spy book is available in hardback and paperback.
Okay.
I'm very happy about the hardback because it just looks really nice. And strangely, it's cheaper. So
that's strange. What are the titles?
Yeah, so Rahab's House of Spies is my most recent book, and my first spy book is called A New Vision of Spycraft. And both of them have been edited by David William Parry, who has been a guest in your show before.
Yes, and if you don't know who he is, well, shame on you. Go back and you'll hear plenty of shows with him on it, and hopefully in the future as well. The Reverend Doctor, I believe. It's not Dr. Reverend, right?
Reverend Doctor, yeah.
The Reverend comes first. I have my own little dyslexia, just like you do, and then that's one of them. Is there anything that I should have asked you that I did not, or anything that we didn't cover that you definitely wanted to cover today?
No, I mean I'm currently working on my research for my doctorate, and I think people should probably try and become more involved with their privacy. I think that's something that's being threatened, and it's not just individual privacy. I think it has an impact on people's collective rights, social rights,
It also keeps us indoors. You were talking about earlier the restriction on movement is something we actually didn't talk about that at all. But I think that most of us, me, but I've always been an introvert. I've never really felt the need to go out, even as a kid. So I can't blame this adult ADHD on technology. It's just another thing to do. But I mean, all of us are putting all of our stuff out there, whether we're giving it to Amazon to buy a book, and then to tell them what TV shows we like, because Prime comes free with it, or whether we're on X and then we don't like X, so then we go to Blue Sky or Mastodon or Threads or Facebook, MySpace, whatever it is. We're giving out our information to all of these places, and all these places are generally owned or will be owned at some point by 3 to 5 companies. because they all consolidate or form partnerships eventually. Like even the streaming services, they're all bundling, and of course they all get you with cheap prices, and then in a year they'll triple their prices, and you'll just be you'll just pay for wireless cable, and then, which already exists, by the way. But I mean, but that's. But we're the point is that we're sheltering in place, even if we're leaving home. We're like, if you go on the train or the bus or even you go to a football game or whatever, people are saying they're looking at their phones the whole time, and people includes me. I'm a person. I'm doing it too. It always feels like the response I'm supposed to get from this professional wrestler, or this person I sent a message to be a guest on this show is more important than the Bruce Springsteen concert that I waited a year to go to. But I need to look at Twitter. I mean, so we do it part to ourselves, but maybe that's planned. Maybe it's not. I mean, maybe it's just to get us to buy things, and it's a nice little unintended side effect that they, whoever they are happy to encourage and keep giving us more social media, more diversions. I mean, you can come upon a plan accidentally and then turn it into a plan. I mean, that happens all the time. Is that any of what you were talking about? Or are you talking about a more open, overt restriction of movement? I mean, I know about COVID and that, and I think a lot of governments overreacted. I think a lot of people underreacted. I think everybody acted poorly. There was probably some middle ground that hopefully we'll figure out next time, when or if there is a next time. But maybe that's my perspective. Maybe I'm nuts. But what were you talking about with freedom of movement? I mean, I guess if we can take 5 or 10 minutes.
Well, I mean, freedom of movement is one of those things that has been made possible in sort of probably the past 100 years. So it's not before that. There was a lot of sort of restrictions on how people could move. But in terms of surveillance, how surveillance restricts freedom of movement, what's happening, because corporations and the government, they want to keep an eye on what's happening on their citizens. It's easier for them if people don't move about, if they're sort of restricted to one area. It just makes it easier to keep an eye on them, but and predict their behavior. But if freedom, if people could sort of travel to another country and sort of be able to go back and forth, then that ability, that capacity is restricted. So there's sort of an agenda that, if you can keep people in one area, then, basically you're controlling them. And that relates to how sort of people in the past were sort of under control. During feudalism, the serfs, they couldn't move, they couldn't leave the land. So there's that sort of parallel going on. And it relates to what B.F. Skinner, the psychologist, the behaviorist, was talking about in the 50s and 40s about, sort of analyzing people's behavior and how that can be predicted. So I think that relates to surveillance capitalism. And, surveillance technology is being used all the time to keep an eye on people's movements. So, if you enter, in the airports, for example, you've got, facial recognition, your luggage is, your whole body is basically surveilled, so it's all connected, and how, to get those surveillance technologies, you need to buy them from the arms industries, basically, so there's a huge economic incentive as well. What they're trying to do is push those technologies around the world so that, governments, the elite, can keep an eye on what people do, basically. So I think it's very sinister in terms of the long-term consequences of, restricting freedom of movement. And in China as well, I mean, you can't leave the country without an approval,
at the same time, you have, there's a lot of nativism. I mean, one of the big issues in the United States is the border. I know that there's similar issues in the UK where, the British citizens are angry that non-British citizens are. Yeah, I don't know all the details of it, but of course, because it's not my country, so it's not really my business. But we have our own problems. But I imagine it's sort of similar: jobs, space, benefits that maybe they're not paying for or didn't earn or whatnot. I mean, I know that there's refugee crises all over the world, and other countries don't want to take them, and you feel like they seem heartless, but then they're like, we have our own stuff to take care of. That's sort of a country. That's why there's a line that keeps us in this rectangle. That's our responsibility, not that. So I don't know, there's a lot of dualism. The world is a confusing, complex place, so the Temptations ball of confusion's going in my head, but I know I've used that song as an outro before. Also, Rockwell, I always feel like somebody's watching me is going through my head, but I think I've used that song before. Is there any song that when you think about all of this nefarious stuff going on and all this that plays in your head that makes you feel good, or preferably worse, that you think of that we should use as the outro?
You only live twice.
Okay.
But
That's fine. Listen, it's guest privilege, and listen, it's less than 5 minutes. So that's where every now and then I ask the guest the song, and it's like they say something and I've never heard of. I'm just like, sure. I look, it's like 17 minutes long. It's like some jazz standard. It's like, okay, I said yes. But you only live twice? James Bond movie theme? Yeah, I know. And probably some really swanky, 60s, women's things like, named Twyla or something. So I'm all for all of that stuff. Petula. So anything by Petula Clark or anything like that is just fine by me. So, all right. Daniele, thank you so much for being on the show. Regards to the Reverend Doctor. I know he's in the back there somewhere. Keep him quiet. It's probably causing him pain and distress. And we'll definitely be in touch. Good luck with the books. Everyone, you can buy them. And if you want to send me a bio or links to anything, I will definitely put them in the show notes.
Thank you very much, Tim.
All right. Thank you for being on The Garden.
One life for yourself and one for your dreams. You drift through the years and life seems tame, till one dream appears and love is its name. And love is a stranger who'll beckon you on. Don't think of the danger, or the stranger is gone. This dream is for you, so pay the price. Make one dream come true. You only live twice. And love is a stranger who'll beckon you on. Don't think of the danger, or the stranger is gone. This dream is for you, so pay the price. Make one dream come true. You only live twice. yourself and one for your dreams. You drift through the years and life seems tame, till one dream appears and love is its name. And love is a stranger who'll beckon you on. Don't think of the danger, or the stranger is gone. This dream is for you, so pay the price. Make one dream come true. You only